G'day and welcome to another episode of Built by Dan. In today's episode, I'm going to be installing the brake and clutch hard lines from the master cylinders through to the engine bay, as well as installing the hard coolant tubes through the center tunnel on my GT40. Now, before I get stuck into today's episode, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody for your support and comments to my last episode on the rear suspension install. I've gone back over all the bracket installations, considered all your comments. Unfortunately, the brackets are the right way around, and I say unfortunately because a lot of you have commented that if they were turned around, it would provide some additional travel or additional clearance. And in principle, yes, it would. But looking through the manual, confirming with some other local builders, it doesn't actually work that way. If you flip the brackets around, the mounting points are offset, so then it changes the whole alignment of the push rod through to the shock. So I think my only option will be to cut the aluminium sheet, that vertical sheet, to provide some additional clearance. So I'm thinking probably 10 to 15 millimeters off the top to increase the height of the arch to clear the spring, and also on the rear side of that cutout for the spring. So that's about ½ inch. I haven't done that yet, but I will be sure to try and capture that process for you in a future episode. Now let's get stuck in today's episode with the brake and clutch hard lines and the coolant tubes. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the top coolant tube and the rear brake and clutch hard lines. I have made a start just because it's been really fiddly to try and hold everything together. So I'll show you what I've done so far. Basically, there is like a little rubber foam insulation piece to go around the coolant tube to just protect it so it doesn't rattle against the central tunnel itself. It's quite large, and even when you try and compress it, it doesn't really compress too much, and it's really difficult to manage sliding the coolant tube into the center tunnel with that insulation piece just sitting on it. So what I've done is I've just put some duct tape around it just to try and compress it a little bit and provide a smoother surface to be able to slide it into that center tunnel. It really is there just for protection so it doesn't rub and rattle against the side walls of the tunnel. So there shouldn't be any issues having that tape on there. If the tape gives way in the future, so be it, the insulation will still be sitting there. Now what I had to do was align these tubes along the coolant tube. There were spacings provided within the build manual, so I just made a little mark on the tube to align everything. Came with some, I think it's about 6 or 10 mil fuel hose that I cut into small pieces and then cut down the length just to be able to split them so that I can actually slide them over the brake and clutch hard lines, and then wrap a stainless steel zip tie around them and tighten them off. In order to hold it in place, I did just put some plastic cable ties on there. It really did help just to hold everything where it needed to be whilst I applied those first few cable ties. So that's basically where I'm at. I fitted 2 fixings at one end. There's the other 2 from the other end. And that comes all the way through to these ends. So this one connects to the clutch, this one connects to the rear brake. It comes up to a T-piece and then splits for the 2 sides of the vehicle. Just to show you how I went about that, I thought I'd save just the last piece. So basically just open up that split in that fuel hose, slide it over the stainless hard lines. And then just tighten that stainless steel cable tie. And that was it. I then cut off the excess, so I will just pull it a bit tighter with the pliers, cut off the excess, and that should be right to slide into the tunnel. Now I haven't installed the insulation for the rear end, so the end that goes close to the engine bay yet. Given the difficulty I had when I tried to do the test fit with a piece sitting on there, I've just done the front end because I will feed it through from the front of the vehicle, so I'll be able to get the entire length up to this point before I have to start fighting with this piece. And what I'm hoping to be able to do is push that through far enough that I can slide this other piece on the end, bring it down, possibly put some duct tape around it as well just to compress it a little bit, and then slide it back through to the position it needs to sit. So that's what I'm going to try and achieve now. Okay, so I've got everything set up. I'm going to try and slide this in. I've had to turn the tubes around a little bit just so that I've got the clearance for these ends to slide through. Now look, I probably could have fed it in from the other end, but it's just a bit more room at the front. But without the second coolant tube in, they've still got enough clearance, so I'll slide this through. Once it's all in, I can then look at installing the second coolant tube. Okay, excellent. That duct tape did exactly what I needed it to, just allowed enough for it to slide into the center tunnel. Now we'll go down to the back and try and get the other piece of insulation onto the other end of the tube and see how we go. Okay, so I've pulled the tube through a bit further. So typically the end of this tube would be sitting in line with this piece here. It will sit up higher once the second tube is sitting below it. But basically I just wanted to pull it through a bit further so that I can slide on a piece of, I might even use this piece that I had on previously, this insulation. I want to slide it back a bit so that I can get some tape on it, similar to what I did at the front, and then basically push it back to the front to get it into position. So I'm going to try a slightly different approach with this one. Given it's really just the sides that I need to squeeze in, I'm just going to try and tape along the tube. Just like that. On each side, just so that I assume it's a rubber installation, isn't catching on the sides, or it creates too much friction and then it just rips. It doesn't want to allow the tube to slide back and forth. Just as I was pushing this tube through, I actually thought maybe I should try this approach instead. It'll use a little bit less tape and it'll just allow it to give a little bit more if it wants to give in the future. So like I said, once it's in position, it doesn't matter so much. It doesn't have to hold tight. So if the coolant tube heats up, if this is the hot pipe, I can't remember if it's hot or cold on top, the tape may give way, but like I said, once it's in position, it's not the end of the world. So that works really well. A lot better than when it was without the tape. So I'm going to lift this up. I'm going to go to the front, lift the front end up to do the same thing. And I'll then slide the other tube in the bottom. And we'll have to do the same thing with the insulation piece and the duct tape. Okay, so I've taped up the front end of that lower coolant tube. It's feeding it through slowly now. I'm just peeling back the tape a little bit just so that it doesn't then interfere when I try to attach the silicone hose ends. Okay, so I've pushed that through a fair way. I'll climb back into the engine bay. And tape on this rear piece. I'd like to set this one back a bit further because this tube does stick out probably, let's say, an inch past there. So to get it so it's tucked back inside that tunnel, it will need to be a couple of inches away. So this top tube will come up to a T-piece and then feed off each side to go to the rear brakes. And then this one on this side, I've already got the joiner on there, is for the clutch. Okay, so just a quick view of clutch, brake and coolant hard lines at the rear of the vehicle exiting into the engine bay. And then the same at the front. So might need to do a bit of adjustment with those lines and the way that the angles that they exit on. I can worry about that when I actually attach the other hard lines that will connect to the master cylinders in the back there. And then when I connect the additional lines at the rear as well in the engine bay. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is work on installing these preformed hard lines that came with the kit. So they run from the master cylinders through to these rear brake and clutch lines that run to the back. Now, I have had to manipulate these a little bit off camera just to get them to try and sit right and connect as they should. So let's get those installed, just done up finger tight. Now what I'm going to do is just position the lower shock mount bracket, which just sits on the chassis here, so that I know where that sits and I don't put one of my clips in the way. Looks like the rear brake is fairly clear, but we do get a bit closer when it comes to the clutch line. Okay, so this is just a quick shot of the clips sitting in place. I'll go and drill and tap those holes now, and we'll come back and fit off those clips. Okay, so I've now drilled and tapped those holes for these little stainless brackets. And we'll just go ahead and screw them in. Okay, so that's it for the front lines. Well, there is one more for the front brakes, but that doesn't quite fit as it's been supplied. I've actually had to order some new brake line, and I'm going to fabricate my own to suit, because the way it's been fabricated from the factory just does not work with the arrangement on the vehicle. Now, the more I look at this, I'm just not quite happy with how it's sitting. So as you can see here, the clutch line is sitting over the top of the rear brake line, and it's just touching. So as I'm driving, that's just going to rub. I just don't like that idea. So what I'm going to look at doing is just getting my pipe bending tool and putting a small bend here and here, just to raise this up a bit higher so that it doesn't rub. All right, so I've moved to the engine bay now, and I'm using this image in the build manual as a reference. It shows me here where the clip should go to hold on those rear brake and clutch lines. So I've laid out the preformed lines that were supplied with the kit, put a bit of masking tape down, and measured and marked out where I'm going to drill and tap the holes for the brackets. So yes, it may be a bit much, but I do have a bit of OCD. I like to know that everything's going to be symmetrical when the job's done, even if you can't see it because the engine blocks it. So I'm going to go ahead now and drill and tap out those holes. I did just install the fuel fittings onto the fuel tank, just to make sure that none of those fittings were going to interfere, or the lines were going to interfere with one another. All clear there, which is good. So I'll drill and tap those holes, and then I'll come back and fit off those brackets.
Okay, so with all those holes drilled and tapped for the brackets, I'll bring the brake and clutch lines back in for this passenger side. And we'll get them fixed off. Not doing it too tight. I want to be able to still slide it around to get it into position once I've got all the clips on. Looks like I've got a slight issue here with the brake line. So it looks like the brake line's actually touching here. So I may just need to manipulate that bend a little bit just to sort of extend it out and make it come out a bit wider so it's not rubbing on the chassis here. I need to get a different tool to be able to do them up. It's just too much of an angle for it to screw in. Okay, so I am having a little bit of an issue just trying to get this in because of that line that needs to be adjusted, but so I'm not really too surprised because it did look like this was going to be a bit of an issue when I just laid them out. But all in all, I'm really happy with how that looks. I'll undo it and make that adjustment just to give it a bit more clearance so it's not rubbing, just with the vibration of the car when it's being driven. And it should be good. Now I'll just do the other side. Okay, it's the same process here. Grab the prefabricated line out of the cab there. Probably not surprised here, but it looks like the same issue on this side. The bend just needs to be manipulated a little bit. It is just rubbing on the corner of the chassis there. I have followed the manual in terms of positioning these brackets or the screws, the mountings, as close as possible to where they're shown in the photos in the manual. There is a bit of give with them, so. Now all that's left is just to fit them off to the central feed line from the master cylinders through in the center tunnel here, and that'll be the rear brake lines and clutch line done. Okay, so now for the fit off to the center tunnel section. I'm kind of thinking it's probably going to need a little bit of adjustment, but surprisingly it's going together pretty well. I will obviously need to tighten these off properly. So that's the rear brakes fitted off. There is one fitting to go here, but it is a bolt, and I don't know yet whether I want to actually drill through and have a nut or a bolt head inside the cab. So I'm just going to leave it for now. I've got it on my list of things to do later on as part of a final fit off. would be an easy fitment later if I decide to just go with that. And that's the clutch line fitted off. All right, so here's a bit of an overview of the lines installed from above. You can see what I'm talking about here. Generally, there's a fairly consistent gap everywhere, except when you get to this corner. So I'm just going to have to sort of move that bend further around to give it a little bit more clearance. And then the same on this side as well. Just for the inside line for the brakes. So it comes around. All we've got left now is to install a little bracket. That'll be the mounting point for where we switch from the hard line to the flexible brake line. And the clutch will fit off at this point here. Okay, so the final step of the brake line install is to mount these brackets for the flexible lines that connect to the rear brake calipers. So as you can see here, it's just a small stainless steel bracket with a, I suppose you call it like a spring clip, and a couple of screws that have been drilled and tapped into the chassis. So that's what it looks like. I'll now show you how I did that as I complete the other side. Okay, so the first thing I did is just to grab the stainless bracket, insert the flexible brake line through, then insert the clip that holds that in the bracket. So that's got that flexible line held in place now. So I'm now going to screw in the hard line to this end, and that'll then allow me just to have it sit nicely where it wants to sit without sort of stretching or manipulating anything, and I can then mark my holes and drill them out. Okay, so I'm just going to grab my flexible line, pass it through and screw in the hard line. That then gives me an idea where it's going to sit. It's just about the same position as the other side, so I'm quite happy with that. I just want to try and get it on a right angle with the angled cutout. Now I'm only going to do one hole initially. Because I just want it to be held in place with the single screw. I'm going to tap that thread first so I can do that. And once I can put that one screw in and tighten that up, it'll allow me to make sure that I've got the second hole in the right place. This plate's a lot thicker than a lot of the other material that I've been tapping so far. Definitely a lot more friction with the thicker plate, that's for sure. I don't think I need the hard line to be connected for this, but yeah, I just want to do my best to try and, like I said, get that at a right angle before I drill the next hole. Okay, so I've got that sitting where I want it. I'll now just go through and drill that second hole. And just to make sure that it is all aligned, when I did the other side, I followed the same approach. And I'll just tap the thread through the bracket. So that taps all the way through now. Just thread it through a little bit further, just to make sure it's a nice clean cut on the threads. And then I'll undo it. Okay, I'll just grab the other screw. Screw that in, and then I'll be able to fit off that, or screw in the hard line. And that'll be it for the rear brakes until I actually install the hubs and rotors and everything on the suspension uprights. I'm just going to clean up this area before I put that line back down, just so I don't catch any filings underneath it. Okay, so final step for the rear brakes for now. Okay, so that wraps that up. I'll jump back to doing the radiator and the front chassis extension that I was intending to do for this episode. So if you like this episode, please hit the like button. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing and supporting me and the channel. And I look forward to seeing you next episode.